What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron. I'm going to be honest with you guys for a second. I am human. I make mistakes in my leagues as well. And I just had my first rookie draft wrap up. And literally it wrapped up maybe like 10 p.m., 11 p.m. That next morning, waivers rolled in. And I got to be honest with you guys, I didn't send any waiver claims. I didn't get to go grab my favorite taxi squad stashes. Everyone got their bids in, and I just kind of sat there. Now, luckily, I had a full roster with already my taxi squad filled up from players I drafted, but it kind of just, lit a fire under my ass. It's like, hey, man, like you aren't really fully prepared for what happens after the rookie draft at this point, because my rankings only go out to like the top 50. I don't have those really fringe guys that are undrafted free agents. I have guys that I obviously looked into pre-draft, but with these undrafted guys, you care much more about situation and wide open depth charts more than you care about how they look in terms of analytics and stuff, because when we're talking about undrafted free agents, we're talking about guys getting opportunity and not getting cut off a 53-man roster. So I did a lot of deep digging today. We went deep. We went into players who went undrafted, day 3 tight ends, all of that good stuff. So we're going to talk about on this video my top must-stash taxi squad stashes, taxi squad players to pick up after your rookie draft wraps up. All these players are outside of the top 48 picks in rookie draft ADP. So with that being said, make sure you go down below, subscribe, and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Let's go.
Thirsty, trying to choose. I know I'm pretty cool. My nitty bag.
Now, before we get into any players, I just want to make it clear there are no quarterbacks and there are no wide receivers on this list. I'm just not super interested in taking flyers on those positions, especially this year. Now, at quarterback, I think it does make sense to take flyers on those guys. You have players that can pretty much, if you get an undrafted free agent guy to just start for a game, he's going to get really boosted in terms of his trade value. The issue is that ideally I would want somebody that is a rushing QB, a Konami code type guy who's an undrafted free agent, like a Tyrod Taylor, day 3 guys. We don't really have one of those this year. We do have Carson Strong, who's interesting. He wasn't a good prospect analytically, but I know a lot of film guys liked him. He goes undrafted. Problem is that he's a statue quarterback. I'm just not interested. There's not a ton of upside there. I think there is some value to be had there. He's just not somebody that I'm personally really going for a ton. I will say I am mostly going for running backs and tight ends, because when we look at running backs, it is very easy for them to accrue value. You just need to have an open depth chart. The starter goes down. As long as your running back has a pulse, you can get into that starting rotation, produce fantasy points. Doesn't have to be good at football. We had Darrell Williams, Devontae Booker, both give you 15 points per game last year, and those are both below replacement level type running backs. And I also am not really targeting wide receivers either. These are guys like the Cornell Powells and the Emir Smith-Marsetts of the world. For wide receivers, for them to pay off, it's very tough, because with wide receivers, targets are earned, carries aren't really earned. Carries are given up to the only guy who is breathing in a backfield by week 8 when the starter goes down. With wide receivers, even when the starter goes down, Michael Thomas goes down, Marquez Callaway comes in, did absolutely nothing last year. So you need a player that is undeniable, who is really good at football and just slip through the cracks. And guys like that look like Stephon Diggs, and they look like Khalil Kerr this year. But guys like that already have very strong analytical profiles on my radar, and they're usually getting drafted in like the 3rd, 4th round of rookie drafts. And at the very least in the NFL, most of them are going drafted. You're not going to get a guy after the rookie draft wraps up who went day 3. Most of these guys are going to be either awful profiles with day 3 draft capital or good profiles who are undrafted. And I know a hot name is Justin Ross. I'm just personally okay on passing on Justin Ross. His freshman year was great, but we have to remember he had that really bad spinal injury. He plays 2 years, was like subpar in both of them. Teams don't want to sign him. He goes undrafted. I know the spot's great with the Chiefs and all that. I just personally would rather pass and take a running back or tight end. Now, you guys might be thinking, like, why tight ends and running backs? I like tight ends because a lot of the top tight ends in the NFL were very raw coming in and were just mega athletes with some production. A lot of them went day 3. You had guys like George Kittle, Darren Waller, Albert O, Dalton Schultz, Robert Tonyan. Those were all guys who went day 3 undrafted and were, they had some juice at the combine athletes. So we're going to talk about the tight ends I'm stashing. That can be that next, Albert O type guy, and the running backs I'm stashing. And the number one top priority at running back for me when we're adding these guys is very easily Abram Smith, who went undrafted and then signed with New Orleans. And this is a running back that probably shouldn't have gone undrafted at all. This is a running back that Lance Zierlein had as RB7 in this class. And Lance Zierlein, his specialty is running backs. His running back grades are by far the highest correlation to future success. He is very good at what he does. He spotted Jordan Howard, who went day 3 in the NFL draft. And I know I keep pumping him up for this, but it's still crazy, man. He gave Jordan Howard a 1st round grade, who then goes day 3. And I know he's not a Hall of Fame running back, but he goes day 3 and was like an RB1 his rookie year. Lance Zierlein is very, very good at what he does. Abram Smith's grade and Jordan Howard's grade are in 2 different stratospheres. Jordan Howard graded similar to a guy like He was graded higher than Najee Harris. He was graded similarly to a guy like a Josh Jacobs in terms of Lance Zierlein's view. He loved Jordan Howard. Now that's a tangent for another time, but Abram Smith is the RB7 in this class for Lance Zierlein, and he has him above guys like Rashad White, James Cook, Tyler Algier, all of these guys who are going round 2, round 3 of rookie drafts, and he likes what he saw in film from him. Now, Abram Smith, he didn't pop at all in my model, but his college career was really weird. He struggled through 3 years. His 4th year, he changed to linebacker, where he was actually really good. He had 48 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and a sack in 5 games. As a first-time linebacker, getting almost 10 tackles per game at the Division I level is pretty crazy. It shows that he's an athlete, but the reason why that's so notable is because with these undrafted free agents, again, we're not looking for talented profiles or guys who pop in analytics. We're looking for guys who are on wide open depth charts, can fit a role, and guys who can make a 53-man roster. We need these players to survive the 53-man roster cuts. And when you have a guy that played linebacker, it means that he can play special teams, which teams love. If you can play special teams, you can have a dual utility where you can also be a depth running back and a special team starter. That is really good for you. And Abram Smith has that going for himself. Now, he changes back to running back in his redshirt senior season, and he went crazy, which is really weird, where he didn't do a ton in terms of production, and then he comes out here and puts up 1,601 yards, a Baylor record in terms of rushing the football with 12 touchdowns. Now, he wasn't great in the passing game. His role was much more between the tackles. He only had 13 receptions during that span, but this is kind of the perfect skill set for the Saints, where he's this between the tackles guy with some pop and some juice. And you have Alvin Kamara, who has never had 1,000 or more rushing yards. It will never be a bell cow that commands 20 or more carries. And there's always been this role next to Alvin Kamara that Mark Ingram had and Latavius Murray had, where they're always going to have Alvin Kamara be the receiving back, the change of pace guy, the dynamic guy, and then you're going to have third and short, and it's time to trot out Mark Ingram, Latavius Murray, and let him do the short yardage stuff and kind of give Alvin Kamara a breather. That role is always great because you're going to get 8 to 12 carries a game because Alvin Kamara is not going to shoulder that workload. And when you look at this depth chart, you have Mark Ingram, who's a cut candidate. We had Latavius Murray on this team last year who got cut. Mark Ingram is also at risk of getting cut. He's been bouncing around now for years. He went to the Ravens, then he went to Houston. Now he's on the Saints again. He is not who he used to be. He is somebody that's on the verge of getting cut. You have Tony Jones, who's also on the verge of getting cut. And then you're also just looking at competition between Josh Adams, Dwayne Washington, and if either of them survive cuts, Tony Jones, who didn't show much last year, and Mark Ingram, who is really old. Now, I'm not saying right away he's going to have that role or that he's going to be a difference maker in fantasy at any point in time, but I'm saying that there's a path there. This is not, he's sitting behind Dalvin Cook or he's sitting behind Joe Mixon. This is Kamara, and there's always going to be a role in that 2 spot, and that 2 spot is wide open for Abram Smith. Now, I'm not saying, again, he's not going to slide in there right away, but he has a path. He also has special teams, so he has a path to staying on 53-man roster. And then you also have a little bit of upside there where we have Alvin Kamara, who's facing legal issues that I'm not really sure what they are, but there's some kind of suspension sort of looming there. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to happen. I think it's maybe, I'm just kind of talking my ass here, but maybe 50-50 chance it happens, whatever. But having that added upside of if Alvin Kamara leaves his team, maybe they sign a veteran, but that just creates even more of a path for Abram Smith to give you a pretty good return on investment in terms of either scoring points in your lineup or being traded later for a second or a third. Now, the next running back we're going to talk about is a Lance Zierlein darling, Kennedy Brooks, who goes undrafted and signs with Philly. He is the RB13 per Lance Zierlein's ranking, so not anything crazy, but he's that next best undrafted free agent running back after Abram Smith, and his blurb is really interesting. Lance Zierlein says, Brooks will be knocked for a lack of suddenness and explosiveness, but may end up becoming a more effective NFL runner than evaluators expect. He's a tempo-based runner with an ability to switch gears inside the run when needed. He has adequate size and vision, but really impresses with his ability to maintain space from defenders as the run progresses. He's not a home run hitter or a physical finisher and is unlikely to offer much third down value. Brooks' smooth, subtle running style can be taken for granted, but is perfect for outside zone teams looking to add competition. He's an RB2 with upside. A player who goes undrafted that he sees as an RB2 on a depth chart with upside for more is really good. And he pretty much gushes about what he offers as a runner, and it's not sexy and it's not home run hitting, but he adds value as a pure rusher, which this offense needs. This is what's really interesting about, Howie Roseman picking him up. I don't think it's a coincidence at all that Howie Roseman went out and grabbed this guy, because we have a backfield right now with, you have explosive playmakers that are much better in space and receiving the ball out of the backfield than they are, pounding up the middle. We have Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell. All of these guys are solid backs, but they don't have size between the tackles type skill sets like a Kennedy Brooks, like they used to have with a Jordan Heyward. Jordan Heyward was there last year. He had kind of that role where Miles Sanders went down, and then Jordan Heyward actually had some really usable weeks. Jordan Heyward is not on the team anymore. So Kennedy Brooks kind of walks right into that role, and I really do think Howie Roseman got him for that reason, and it shows. He really wanted Kennedy Brooks. When you look at the contracts, Kennedy Brooks signed the most expensive undrafted free agent contract among all quarterback, running back, wide receivers, and tight ends outside of quarterback Carson Strong. Obviously, the quarterback's going to get paid the most, but still pretty notable anyways. I think that this is a guy that can carve out a role right away as a between the tackles guy. And this backfield last year, they rode the hot hand between Boston Scott and Jordan Heyward and Miles Sanders. There's a world out there where Kennedy Brooks kind of flashes early, and he has a pathway to getting carries early, which is what we're looking for. The next guy we're going to talk about here is really fun. It's Zaquandre White, undrafted free agent, signed with Miami, running back out of South Carolina. Again, like a really fun prospect. First, he was a 4-star recruit out of high school, and he had like fabled type high school numbers. He ran a 4.5 40. He had a 43.5 inch vertical coming out of high school, which is insane. For an 18-year-old to put up those numbers is wild. Now, his combine numbers didn't reflect those numbers. I know you're looking at them on the screen, and he ran like a 4.6 something. Apparently, he had a ankle injury he was dealing with. I do believe that he's more athletic than those numbers lead on. Now, when we talk about his college career, he had a really weird path where he goes to Florida State, he redshirts, then they're like, you can't really play running back for us. Maybe at that time they had Cam Akers, I'm not sure, but he goes and plays linebacker, which again, we love to see. Special teams utility. We want that really bad. So on this Miami team, he played linebacker before. He can, maybe contribute in special teams. So then he transfers to a JUCO and he absolutely dominates. He was the number 1 JUCO recruit at running back in 2020 ahead of Rashad White. Now, a guy who does really great work over at BDGE, over at Breakout Finder, Player Profiler, Noah Hill's at BDGE. He took the time out to find his JUCO College Dominator rating, and his JUCO College Dominator rating was one of the best he's ever seen. It was better than Rashad White's, Antonio Gibson's, Alvin Kamara, all of those guys who were JUCO studs. The guy in JUCO, he was playing like top of the nation type JUCO teams. He actually had one game, I was looking at the game logs, against Independence College, who was on like Last Chance U, which is really crazy. And in that 1 year, in 8 games, he averaged 110 rushing yards per game and 11 touchdowns in those 8 games. Just really crazy type production from that perspective. After that, he transfers for, I believe it would be like his true senior season, to South Carolina. He backs up Kevin Harris. Then in his final year, his like 5th year at that point, I believe, he breaks out his redshirt senior season. He breaks out and has 88 for 583 and 2 touchdowns on the ground with 19 receptions for 202 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air. It's a little bit concerning that he doesn't have like a 1,000-yard rushing season at the Division I level, but he was extremely efficient and explosive. Again, Noah Hills does great work. In terms of running backs, I like to look at the analytics, but when we're talking about these like really fringy guys, I pretty much defer to him in terms of his, running back teammate efficiency. He is really great at what he does. I believe his handle on Twitter is like Noah More Parties. He's really, really good at what he does. His yards per carry, Zaquandre White's yards per carry relative to his teammates during his career was 89th percentile. He had a 91st percentile missed tackles forced per carry and a 97th percentile breakaway conversion rate. Again, explosive, big plays, very efficient on his carries. This is a really, really interesting profile where he's kind of this raw, like very high upside guy. Again, a lot of receptions, like 19 receptions for only having like 500 rushing yards is huge. He had like a 10.1% target share that year. He has a 3-down skill set. It's really the idea of can he put it all together? And Lance Zierlein's blurb is really, really interesting when he's talking about Zaquandre White. He said, explosive, athletic runner. Again, this is a guy I believe is much more explosive and athletic than he tested at his pro day, combine, whatever, with good size but lack of discipline in his running style. Again, we already know he played Florida State, then South Carolina. He's entertaining to watch with unpredictable, razor sharp cuts from any spot on the field, but he frequently strays from designed run tracks, which prevents him from finding a rhythm. White has plenty of tread left on the tire, and his blend of size and explosiveness will be very appealing for teams looking for a developmental RB3 with run/catch upside to move up the depth chart. Now, again, he is raw. I think that this is somebody who sort of came out of high school as maybe more of like an athlete. Again, he played like linebacker in college a little bit. So maybe he's not super in tune with like the nuance of the position, but it seems like a guy who got dinged for that, but has all the raw upside in the world. Again, dominated at JUCO, highly recruited high school recruit, on the touches he was given, he was explosive. That's not a glowing review, but that's a, hey, this guy has a really unorthodox way of playing, but if he can figure it out, he has all the upside in the world. And that's really, really interesting. Now, he also goes to one of the most wide open depth charts in the NFL on the Miami Dolphins. He has Chase Edmonds, Raheem Mostert, Sony Michel, Myles Gaskin, and Salvon Ahmed to compete with. Now, that's a lot of names, but it's more quantity than quality. We have Chase Edmonds at the top, who isn't exactly a 3-down bell cow for, by any means. He is much more of a receiving back. Past that, we're talking about fringy, between the tackle type runners that are always hurt in Raheem Mostert and Sony Michel. And then Gaskin's been great, and Salvon Ahmed's been sort of hit or miss, but those are both guys brought in by the previous head coach as day 3 undrafted free agent guys. This is a pretty wide open depth chart. I'm not saying that Zaquandre White's even going to get run in 2022, but there is a path here, especially with Mike McDaniel coming in as head coach from San Francisco, where they've always had a next man up mentality. I believe JaMychal Hasty, undrafted free agent for the 49ers, his rookie year, I believe that he came in for like a game or two and gave you startable weeks. It wouldn't shock me if like week 12, Zaquandre White comes in there and has like 13 carries for like 50 something yards. It wouldn't shock me at all. I do think that he is a really, really interesting upside play. If he puts some of it together, Mike McDaniel is going to have a best running back sort of play type mentality. I do love what Zaquandre White can kind of offer. I do think that he could be like a Myles Gaskin where he puts together a decent season at some point. Now, again, very long shot. I'm not saying that is the expectation, but he has a path to that. I think that is in his like 100th percentile outcome. Zaquandre White could be really fun for fantasy. Now, the last running back we're going to talk about is Julius Chestnut. He's really interesting. He goes undrafted to the Titans, but was really dominant in college, and he has really good size at 5'11", 228. That is a thick boy. He's not a great athlete. He ran a 4.61 at his pro day, but we've seen RBs sort of find success with that sort of speed, like Kareem Hunt. I believe that James Robinson wasn't very fast either. The interesting part about his profile is that he played at Sacred Heart, so not great competition, but the guy dominated at that competition. He had a 95th percentile college dominator rating. He was pretty much a 4-year starter. He was at least a 3-year starter. His first year, he was still great. 700 yards, 7 touchdowns on the ground in 11 games. As a true freshman at any competition is pretty wild. And then his second year, 1,544 yards and 13 touchdowns in 12 games, pretty wild. His junior year, during the COVID season, they probably played, I think, just like 4 games. They played 4 games. He had 855 yards and 12 touchdowns. That is roughly like 200 rushing yards per game and 3 touchdowns per game. He was genuinely looking like the office linebacker out there, just throwing kids around. It's wild. Now, he probably should have like transferred at some point, right? He just keeps on dominating these poor kids who are playing like FCS football. But he had 3 straight 100-yard per game type seasons. Again, not a great level of competition, but he was a mega producer with some real upside, when we look at just him absolutely dominating that competition. Now, he comes to the Titans where he walks into an empty depth chart. Now, obviously, they have Derrick Henry at the top, but with these guys, we just want a guy who can become a handcuff, who then can be thrusted into carries once the starter goes down. And we have Derrick Henry up top. And then it's pretty much wide open. We have D'Onta Foreman leave. I'm trying to think of who else they had last year, but they had D'Onta Foreman leave, and now really they just have Dontrell Hilliard. And then they also drafted 4th rounder Hassan Haskins, who doesn't have the best profile in the world. Like, it wouldn't be wild to me at all if Julius Chestnut came into this backfield. And I don't think he's ever going to take Derrick Henry, obviously not, but he can be like an Elijah Mitchell sort of, where even though the team drafted Hassan Haskins first, he could just look better in camp and kind of earn his way into the number 2 spot. I do believe that number 2 spot's wide open for Hilliard, Haskins, and Chestnut. So if he's good, if he, wasn't just a product of playing against Sacred Heart level schedules, then he could be a really fun steal after rookie drafts. And now we're going to switch to tight ends. The first guy we're going to talk about is Chig Okonkwo. Okonkwo fits what we want from tight ends. He's an uber athlete. He has some production, right? He produced like his final year. He had a few receptions here and there. It's a little bit tough, right? So he had like 500 receiving yards in his final year. These tight ends, that's really all you can ask for at the college level. They just don't get used a ton unless if you are just a Kyle Pitts type guy. If not, then you're looking at like 40 for 500 and like 3 touchdowns, and that's like pretty solid. Now, Okonkwo, I feel like I'm butchering that name, but he stands 6'2", 243 pounds, runs a 4.52. That is really fast for a tight end. He looks like a Jonnu Smith type move tight end, right? Where he's smaller, more compact, and he's really fast. And that's perfect because for being a Jonnu Smith clone, he goes to Tennessee, where Jonnu Smith had his previous success, and his old tight ends coach is now the offensive coordinator of Tennessee, right? Todd Downing, who is an awful offensive coordinator, but again, he was the tight end coach during Jonnu Smith's tenure there, which is interesting, right? It's kind of like this is kind of perfect. Maybe he saw some shades of Jonnu, and that's why they drafted him. Now, he goes to a relatively open depth chart with Austin Hooper and Joff Swaim. Austin Hooper, I guess, is okay. He's probably going to be the starter, of course, but this is a team with a lack of receiving weapons. You have Robert Woods coming off an ACL. You have literally just Treylon Burks, and you have Austin Hooper. There are places wide open so that if he is talented at all, he can carve out a role almost right away to sort of mix in here and there. If not, he's a nice stash who can develop into something down the road. Again, we just don't want a player that is going there where he's like buried on the depth chart or anything. He's going to have every opportunity to get snaps, and then eventually he can develop into a startable tight end. The next guy we're going to talk about is Daniel Bellinger. He went 4th round to the New York Giants, tight end out of San Diego State. And he's a similar type of archetype where he is a super athlete at tight end. Not quite as fast as a 40, but he's bigger. He ran a 4.63 at 6'5", 250 pounds. So he's more of that traditional tight end. He was also very explosive, 80-second burst score. Tons of upside with this guy. He wasn't a mega producer, but again, he showed flashes, which is all we're really looking for. He had 31 catches, 357 yards, and 2 touchdowns as a senior. So pretty much as good as it'll get for a college tight end playing in wherever San Diego plays. It's the WAC, the Mountain West or whatever. But again, he kind of looks like that upside tight end. And we have Brian Dabble coming from the Bills to the Giants. And a guy who looks very similar to Daniel Bellinger is Dawson Knox, who I believe is like 1 inch shorter, but the same weight and ran a crazy fast 40 as well. He was also a guy who didn't produce in college. I believe Dawson Knox had no touchdowns in college, which is pretty weird for a guy who scored like a ton of touchdowns last year. But he does fit a similar type of mold to a Dawson Knox. So it could be, Brian Dabble trying to like grab Daniel Bellinger to be the Dawson Knox of this offense. Now, again, especially with tight ends, we're not expecting them to produce right away, but he is going to have every opportunity to step into any kind of role there. Maybe catch a few passes here and there. All he has on the depth chart is Ricky Seals-Jones and Jordan Atkins. Again, we're not expecting early production, but when we have those kind of guys on the depth chart, it is easy for him to maneuver, years down the line. And then also, we really don't want him to be on a team with an established veteran tight end like a George Kittle, like a Mark Andrews. There really is no getting yourself out of that hole. Now, the last tight end we're going to talk about here is actually a hybrid. He is a running back / tight end. He is a really fun prospect that I think is really, really cool to grab after the rookie draft is done. He's a very deep guy. Maybe you need to have a little bit more roster spots in your league, but he is really fun. He is Connor Heyward out of Michigan State, who played running back, fullback, tight end, H-back. One of those kind of like utility players on offense you don't see a ton anymore in the modern NFL or just modern football in general, but he was very versatile. He had a season with over 100 rush attempts, and he had 2 seasons over 30 receptions. That is really good receiving numbers, and it also shows that he can run between the tackles. This is not to say that he'll ever like be a mainstay running back, like he can be a James Robinson, but he goes to the Steelers in the 6th round as well, not an undrafted guy. And the reason why it's interesting is because they drafted Jalen Samuels, I believe NC State running back a few years back, who was also an H-back. And Heyward is actually really fun because he has a tight end designation on sleepers. So in the event that Najee Harris goes down and Heyward gets any kind of a role, his receptions will be worth 1.5 PPR in tight end premium leagues, and he could also contribute carries on the ground, right? We have a really wide open RB2 spot on this team. We have Benny Snell, we have Anthony McFarland, Trey Edmonds. None of these guys have proven to be like the go-to RB2 type guy on this team, so there is a world where things could break right for Connor Heyward, and he would be a fantasy cheat code. These are his game logs from when he filled in for James Conner during 2018-2019. Now, it's nothing crazy, but he had one game with like 142 yards on the ground, 2 catches for 30 yards. Imagine that in your tight end spot that you got off of waivers after your rookie draft. He also had another game where he had 12 carries, 53 yards, 3 catches, 11 yards, and a touchdown through the air. Again, that value for free in your tight end spot is kind of a cheat code. It's kind of like a Taysom Hill type, cheat code at the position. It's a really fun upside case for a player that probably shouldn't have more utility than he does on our rosters. Now, that's going to do it for us today, fellas. As always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you go down below, subscribe, leave a like, and I will see you guys in the next one.
I got the juice.
10-0, Chatham's on. Foolies glad I'm home. Even my haters kinda glad I'm on. Rest in peace to my vagabond. Rapper, song, singer, suspended, subpoena for misdemeanors. Dreamer, held back asses, Loki still.